Before we get started, there are a few things that we'd like to lay out. Having been in Singapore for almost 4 months now, we have noticed that it's much more difficult to hook up with girls. Specifically, casual sex and the idea of spending the night with a stranger is less acceptable in Singapore's youth culture, with 48% of Singaporean youth perceiving that sex before marriage is an unacceptable act, even if the two people love each other. It is somewhat of a stigmatized topic here, whereas in Canada, our home country, it is much more acceptable and happens often. The average Canadian will have 15 sexual partners, whereas the average Singaporean has an average of 5.8. Canadians start having sex at an average age of 15. Singaporeans first have sex on an average age of 19. So, slightly upset with the situation, we decided to explore why Singapore and Canada differ so greatly in attitudes toward hooking up. First, we tried a funny pickup line to try and attract women. We decided it would be most consistent to try it on a Singaporean and then a Western girl. Let's take a look at what happens.
I just fell for you, can I have your number? What? I just fell for you, can I have your number? You have me on Facebook. Oh yeah, okay, nice. Yeah. Sorry, I just fell for you. Can I have your number?
Those are some funny clips. Now we get into our analysis of hookup culture. Let's take a look at what we found. Hi, my name is Vikram. We've decided to explore the sentiment towards hookup culture in Singapore, as well as the difference we have found between the hookup culture in Singapore and that of our home country, Canada.
Thanks, Vikram. Hi, my name is Brody. We decided that we would examine 4 dimensions we decide most affects a country's hookup culture: parents, religion, media, and wealth.
Perfect. Thanks, Brody. So first, we're going to talk about parents. In Singapore, the topic of sex is often somewhat taboo amongst parents and their children. Upon surveying Singaporean students at SMU, we found that parents often had a brief conversation with their kids, outlining safe sex, as well as informing them not to do it at a young age. In general, parents from Singapore also displayed less affection towards one another in front of their children, only rarely kissing and hugging. This type of behavior sets the stage for Singaporean youth and makes sex a stigmatized subject.
Thanks, Vikram. In the typical Canadian family, the topic of sex is seen as an inevitable part of life for a teenager. Not only is sex education a part of the curriculum in our Canadian school system, but it is also a topic that is widely discussed in a family setting. It is important for Canadian parents to acknowledge the risks of sex and the importance of safe sex. However, it is not an act that is banned in most households. Through conversations with our Canadian friends, it seems that parents believe that so as long as such intimate acts happen privately and under safe circumstances, it is perfectly acceptable for 2 consenting teenagers to have sex.
Thanks, Brody. So next, we're going to talk about religion in Singapore. There are 4 primary religions within Singapore: Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, as well as Christianity. Although Singapore does have a high percentage of non-religious population, with 18% identifying within this group, those that are religious take it slightly more serious than Canadians do. When we interviewed local students at our lovely SMU, we found that amongst those that were religious, they said they attended regular religious meetings, like church, and followed their religions extremely closely. Being bound to a certain set of religious rules may impact their willingness to be sexually active before marriage, as many religions do not tolerate this kind of behavior.
Thanks, Nick. Canadians are very multicultural, as the country has a very loose immigration laws and welcomes immigrants as means to growth. Christianity represents the dominant religion, capturing 67.3% of the population. Other than that, religions are extremely divided. The second most popular religion is Islam, representing only 3.2% of the population, with Hindus, Sikhs, and Buddhists closely behind. Even more popular, though, is being non-religious, which 25% of Canadians identify themselves as. Although many are Christian, religion does not play a large role in Canadian lifestyles. Being a very neutral, open, and accepting country, most do not take one religion extremely seriously, especially among the youth population, which explains the large percentage of non-religious people. This contributes to a higher sexual activity among Canada's youth, as they are not bound by any religious set of rules.
Almost ran out of water there. Good thing we filled up. Next, we're going to talk about media in Singapore. Although we originally believed media would have played a role in Singapore being less sexually active, we were wrong. When we asked students, they said their media consumption was primarily Western-originated content. Movies, music, and TV were all similar to what Canadians would also consume, and therefore do not have any significant effect on either groups in determining why their behavior in hooking up differs.
In the absence of effective sex education at home or at school, the media has become the leading sex educators in Canada. It is important to acknowledge how media fits into the equation. The average Canadian teenager spends almost 9 hours per day absorbing media. Whether teenagers are being exposed to sexual content through movies and television or through social media channels such as Facebook and Instagram, it is no wonder why so many Canadian teenagers are having sex younger and more frequently. You have fashion that is very revealing, you have celebrities who are glorifying sexy dressing. Sex has become cool, abstinence is not. And when you see how parents are now working longer hours, it really just all adds up.
Thanks, Brody. Next, we're going to talk about wealth. In Singapore, we found many women to be focused on materialistic possessions, or good looks, meaning to attract a woman, one must give off a great first impression. Maybe I'm just ugly, but when attempting to talk to Singaporeans, most were not interested in the slightest. We believe this may also be due to their perception of strangers. When attempting to approach strangers, they all seem to be extremely confused. Also, Singapore holds a high population density per square mile of 18,600, which means no matter where you are on the island, having your own house to bring a girl or guy home would be next to impossible.
Thanks, Vic. So, the dominant college culture in Canada reflects the beliefs of the more privileged classes. We wanted to examine how the variable of wealth affects the hookup culture, both from the perspective of men and women. From a female perspective, it seems that less privileged women are not as interested in hooking up due to the fact that they may experience a faster transition into adulthood. For less privileged women not interested in hooking up, college life could be experienced as mystifying, uncomfortable, and alienating. Because less privileged women had less exposure to the notion that the college years should be set aside solely for educational and career development, they often did not view serious relationships as incompatible with college life. From a male's perspective, however, it seems that those that do want to participate in the hookup culture may not necessarily require as much funds as those in Singapore. Although it is advantageous to be able to flaunt money, there's less need for money as many people are located in student-owned houses rather than expensive nightclubs. Moreover, housing surrounding Canadian universities is much more inexpensive as a result of Canada's low population density of 3 people per square mile. As a result of this, most students, regardless of income, have their own place to bring back a partner of their choosing for casual sex. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch analysis on hookup culture in Singapore and Canada. 3 of the 4 topics we explored proved to be differentiators in influencing perceptions towards hookup culture, media being excluded. Perceived attitudes towards hookup culture stem from an early exposure to different schools of thought that shape each individual's opinion. What we are exposed to as children and throughout aging is much different, respectively, in both Canada and Singapore, thus explaining the difference in hookup culture. We hope you gained insight into the subject, and we wish you all the best in hooking up.